Good evening, everybody. Just getting this live video going tonight. Tonight we're going to be talking about the immune system. So if y'all give me just a couple minutes, we'll see if anybody hops on here. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So tonight we're going to be talking about the immune system, and we're going to give a little bit of a different perspective on how the immune system actually functions and some of the stuff that we can do to actually support ourselves and look to see if our immune system is going to be vulnerable. So with COVID happening in the last 2 years, I know everybody's been really focused on the immune system and your immune response and the things that you can do to kind of boost your immune system. So what we're going to do is go through how the immune system actually functions this week. And then next week we're going to talk about some of the stuff that we can do to actually support our immune system and test to see if our immune system's functioning the way that we want it to. Now, what we're going to start doing in the office is once a week, I'm going to hop on here for about 15 to 20 minutes and do what's called a different perspective. So if you're familiar with the Wellness Way, Dr. Patrick does a different perspective every Saturday morning. It's about an hour long, and he goes deep dive into a lot of different health topics. So I've got about 6 or 7 different topics I want to talk about, but I want you guys to give me some feedback about some of the things that you'd like to learn about, and we'll go ahead and do a different perspective on it and just talk about the Wellness Way approach to health. So like I said, this week we're going to be outlining the immune system a little bit more, and in the coming weeks we're going to talk about what actually goes wrong with the immune system and how we can support that function. And we'll dive into some other issues, things like thyroid conditions, Hashimoto's, some hormone imbalance issues, gut problems, all sorts of stuff like that I know you guys want to learn about. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Now, in order to talk about the immune system, the first thing we have to do is identify what the immune system actually is. So if we look at the U.S. National Library of Medicine, what they define the immune system as is a complex network of cells, tissues, and organs that work together to defend against germs. Helps your body recognize these foreign invaders, then its job is to keep them out. Now what I want you to focus on there is germs. So the immune system is not only designed to fight against germs, but against all other things coming into the body. It's also going to really help protect your body against things that your body creates. So against cells that are not formed properly, aka cancerous cells. So that's another big thing that the immune system is designed to do, is regulate all those cells. So I want you to keep that in the back of your mind, that already our definition of what the immune system is a little bit skewed. If we look at another definition here, what this one says is the role of the immune system is a collection of structures and processes within the body. So there we go. We're adding another level, is that it's processes, right? So not only is it immune system and is it organs and tissues, but there's a lot of processes and steps that take place for that normal immune function. It's to protect against disease and other potentially damaging foreign bodies. When functioning properly, the immune system identifies a variety of threats, including viruses, bacteria, parasites, the things that we think about when we typically think about the immune system, and distinguishes them from the body's own healthy tissue. And we'll talk about this a little bit more when we start to talk about some autoimmune conditions, things like Hashimoto's, thyroiditis, but that's going to be a big differentiating factor with when the immune system is functioning properly. So if the body's tissue is healthy, the immune system should not go after it. Now, if that starts to happen in the case of autoimmune conditions, and again, we'll talk about this in the next upcoming weeks, we're going to have other things that we need to look at there. So, if all we did was fight against bacteria, then this next thing would just throw a loophole in everything, right? So the human immune system is colonized by an estimated 100 trillion bacteria. So there's trillions of bacteria that live inside of us. A lot of them are in our gut, in our respiratory tract, in our nasal cavity, and those are all normal bacteria. So if the immune system's job is to identify and get rid of bacteria, how then can we be living with trillions of bacteria that are actually very beneficial and vital for our life? So clearly there's something else going on with immune function, and we have to start to understand if we want to know how the body's working. Here's another one. So normal viruses, how about that? So there's actually viruses called bacteriophages that infect and destroy specific bacteria. So these are viruses that are going to start to attack bacteria. So not only is our immune system going after those bad bacteria, we have viruses that live inside of us that also go after those bacteria. They're found in the mucous membranes lining the digestive, respiratory, and reproductive tracts. The mucus is thick, jelly-like material that provides a physical barrier against the invading bacteria. And we're going to start to talk about the barriers and how important maintaining a good, strong barrier function is to that immune response. Protects the underlying cells from being infected. Recent research suggests that phages present in the mucus are a part of our natural immune system, protecting the human body from invading bacteria. So again, we have these phages or viruses that are actually protecting us from different bacteria. So there's a lot of really complex things that you can already start to see that are taking place with that immune system. So really, and for what we've talked about so far, the definition that we've come up with is that the immune system is the cells, molecules responsible for immunity. So there's cells, molecules, there's also organs and tissues. The human body invests heavily in these cells dedicated to defense. Because if we can't defend our body, we all know what happens. We start getting sick really often. And then in some cases, we succumb to those diseases because our defense isn't strong enough. So it is very important that our body's investing and dedicating itself to defending itself. So again, the immune system is the body's defense against infections. And that's, again, if we're focusing all our attention on infections, which you'll see here later on, is that we're going to be missing a big part of what that immune system does. So again, not well defined, but it is based on those infectious agents according to our current definition. So what I'd like to offer you is a different definition of what that immune system actually does. So the new definition is all the mechanisms used by the body as protection against environmental agents. So those are going to be both internal and external things that are foreign to the body. These agents can be microorganisms, chemicals, products, food, chemicals, drugs, pollen, animals, or abnormal cells. And again, that's when we start getting into autoimmune conditions and into cancer and things like that, and how important that immune function is to prevent things like cancer and autoimmunity. So what we're going to talk about here is the different layers that we need to have for a normal immune response. So we'll talk about what we can do to respond to that, or how the immune system responds, and then in the coming weeks we'll talk more about how the medical system treats it, some of the things that weaken that immune response, how to build a healthy immune response, and how we can actually test your immune response to see if you're vulnerable or compromised. Now, this is what we commonly think of when we think of that immune response, right? Everybody thinks that kids are born with a strong, healthy immune system, and then as we age, we start to get more vulnerable, right? The protect the weak, wear a mask so we don't get grandma sick because grandma has a weakened immune system. And we think that as we age, the immune system starts to break down. And that's actually not the case. And I'm going to show that to you, do some research and some lab testing and things like that as we go through tonight to help change your perspective on how the immune system actually functions. Now, this is what it really is like. We're born with a compromised immune system. So we have two different types of immunity. We have innate immunity, which is the immune system that we're born with, and our adaptive immune system. So the adaptive immune system grows by responding to the environment. Now, that's what's going to grow as we age, as our body responds and interacts with different viruses, bacteria, things like that. And we start to develop a stronger immune system as a result of that. And if we take care of our bodies, and if the immune system works properly throughout our lifetime, we should actually build a stronger immune system as we age. And we're going to talk about how we can actually encourage that immune system to develop properly. Before we do that, we got to talk about how the immune system works. So, all right, there it is. Now, this is going to be a lot overwhelming at first, and what we're going to do is go through this step by step tonight so that you can understand the different pieces and parts of the immune system. First thing we'll talk about here is the three different layers to the immune system, right? So we talked about the innate immune response and the acquired immune response. There's also the barrier immune system. That's things that we don't typically think of, things like the skin, the mucous membranes in our sinuses, our mouth, our throat, stomach, digestive barrier. And the barriers are basically everything that separates the external environment, so the air, this desk, drink, from what's inside of our body and our bloodstream and in our cells. So if those barriers are compromised, that's when we're going to start allowing things that are outside the body to start to get into the body. Those barriers, again, are going to be found in the lungs, the respiratory system, so places where we're breathing things in, the GI system, the stomach, small intestine, large intestine, places where we're ingesting that food, the genital urinary tract, so again, we have exposure to the outside world through the genitals, and the nose and pharynx, which is nose, sinuses, the mouth cavity, things like that. So those are all places that we have that barrier immune function. If we don't have proper barriers, that's when we're going to start to see a breakdown in that normal immune response. Now, if something were to get through that barrier, so say I trip and fall and I scrape my knee. Now, it's going to start bleeding, it's going to start forming a scab, things like that. But before all that happens, now I have an opening into the external environment. And so say I scrape my knee on dirt, and that dirt has viruses or bacteria in it. Now, those are going to have a portal of entry into my body. And at that point, that's when my innate immune system is going to start to kick in. Now, there's different cells involved with the innate immune system, and we could talk for hours about all these different cells, but we're going to focus on a couple different ones here specifically. So we've got neutrophils, mast cells, basophils, dendritic, eosinophils, monocytes, macrophages, and natural killer cells. Those all do various things throughout the body. What we're going to focus mostly on today are macrophages, dendritic cells, and then natural killer cells, because those are a really important part of that innate immune response and actually connecting the innate immune system to the adaptive immune system. So if you've ever gone to the doctor's office and had blood work done, chances are you've had a CBC done, which is a complete blood count, and usually they're going to add a differential, and that's where we can actually start to see all of these cells and where they're at in your blood. So this is what that looks like. You can see we've got a breakdown of our white blood cells up at the top. The white blood cells are all of our immune cells. We can see our red blood cells and description of what those red blood cells look like. And then we've got a breakdown of all of our different white blood cells up here. So those cells that we just talked about, the basophils, granulocytes, lymphocytes, monocytes, eosinophils, macrophages, things like that. We can actually see all of those on the blood test. Now, remember the ones I said we were going to talk about: macrophages, dendritic cells, and natural killer cells. So what you'll start to see here is a little bit of a gap. So the macrophages and dendritic cells, those are going to be our monocytes. But we can see already we're missing the natural killer cells. So how can we properly evaluate the immune system if we're not testing for it on our normal blood work, right? So let's start to think about that. Again, focusing mostly tonight on macrophages, dendritic cells, and natural killer cells. So if you remember that four-way box that we talked about, to break that box up, basically what we have is our innate immune system on the left side and our adaptive immune system on the right side. Across the top, we have all the things that we're going to do to protect and identify things that get into the body. And on the bottom, we have all the things that we're going to do to eradicate and get rid of those things. So the first box we'll talk about is the top left. This is our innate immune systems, so our inborn immune system's ability to identify different things. And that's where we can see those two cells, macrophages and dendritic cells. And what's going to start to happen is that as something crosses that border, so say I fall and I scrape my knee, bacteria, virus gets across that border, the macrophages and dendritic cells are going to start to identify that. So they live right on the other side of those borders, right where those bacteriophages and those viruses lived. And they start to identify when something comes into the body that's not supposed to be there. Now, a lot of times the macrophages can actually clean up that response and they can get rid of it. So in the case of just falling and slipping and scraping my knee, chances are not enough bacteria or virus is going to get into my body to actually create a big problem, because that localized response is going to be enough to eradicate it. Now, if we want to look at this in blood work, again, what we can see here is monocytes. So if somebody's fighting an infection, the first line of a defense, macrophages, basophils, or macrophages and dendritic cells, those cells are actually going to start to spike up as soon as we get that immune system response. And this is what that looks like. If you look at the differential here, you'll see those lymphocytes, or the monocytes right here, 14.8%, those are high. So when we have high monocytes like that, it tells us our body is starting to respond and react. Now, this was in a patient who just had regular blood work done. He wasn't sick, didn't feel sick. That's not why he went to the doctor. And what this tells me is basically that his body is responding the way that it's supposed to, and his immune system's starting to take care of something. He didn't realize he was sick because his immune system worked the way it was supposed to and was able to get rid of that germ or pathogen that got into the body. Now, the next line of defense that our innate immune system has is natural killer cells. So these are going to be the guys that come in and really start to break down and get rid of those viruses, bacteria, whatever it is that's coming through. Natural killer cells are very, very cool cells, and we actually just recently started learning more about natural killer cells and the way that they function with things like cancer. So one of the really cool things about a natural killer cell is its ability to actually start to identify those cells that are formed by the body that are not supposed to be there, and it clears them out and gets rid of them. So again, if we look at what that natural killer function does, it doesn't attack microbes. Its job is to go after defective cells that are created by the body, aka cancer, like the live tumor cells and virally infected cells. Now the way the body attacks a virus is different from a bacteria. Viruses are their own weird little class of organisms, and they don't actually have their own replication and cells, things within them. They actually hijack the body's replication centers to reproduce themselves, and they destroy our own cells in the process of doing that. And natural killer cells identify those cells that have been infected by viruses, and they actually go and kill them before they can really replicate that virus. So that's again our innate immune system. That's our first line of defense. So if we don't have natural killer cells, it's going to open us up to becoming more susceptible to viruses and more susceptible to cancer because we can't clear those things out in a timely fashion. So natural killer cells, a type of immune cell that has granules, which are just really small particles that have enzymes that kill tumor cells or cells infected with a virus. And that's from the National Cancer Institute. So if the National Cancer Institute is identifying the importance of natural killer cells with cancer, don't you think we should be looking for those more? And we can test them in the blood. It's just not part of a normal blood test, and people don't look at it until either you already have cancer or you have HIV or AIDS, which is something that we'll talk about next week. But being able to identify where the levels of those things are at now means that we can start to figure out if you're going to be susceptible to something, cancer, viral infection, things like that, before you come in contact with it, so that we can prevent you from being injured by things like that. Now, if we look at the British Society for Immunology, now I'm going to read this whole thing because this entire part is very important. So natural killer cells are lymphocytes in the same family as T and B cells. Now T and B cells we'll talk about as part of the adaptive immune system for everybody who's familiar with antibodies and the antibody response that we try to elicit with certain things. That's going to be our B cells. So they come from a common progenitor. However, as cells of the innate immune system, natural killer cells are classified as group 1 innate lymphocytes and respond quickly to a wide variety of pathological challenges, meaning that as soon as a virus enters your body, those natural killer cells are going to be there ready to start attacking that before it can invade and create an illness or a sickness. So it makes sense that we would want to have a lot of natural killer cells so that we're not going to be susceptible to things like that. Natural killer cells are best known for killing virally infected cells and detecting and controlling early signs of cancer. Again, early signs of cancer before it starts to take over and become a major problem in your body. They also protect against disease. Specialized NK cells or natural killer cells are also found in the placenta and may play an important role in pregnancy. Natural killer cells were first noticed for their ability to kill tumor cells without any priming or prior activation. In contrast to cytotoxic T cells, which we'll talk about in a second, which need priming by antigen-presenting cells. The antigen-presenting cells are the macrophages and dendritic cells. They're named for natural killing because of their ability to kill cells. Additionally, natural killer cells secrete cytokines such as IFN, gamma, and TNF-alpha, which act on immune cells like macrophages and dendritic cells to enhance the immune response. So again, looking for a strong, robust immune response, it all starts with having a good amount of natural killer cells. Now, looking again at our immune panel, we already talked about this. We see granulocytes, lymphocytes, monocytes, eosinophils, and basophils, but we don't see natural killer cells. Now, if you remember from when I just read that passage, natural killer cells are actually a part of that lymphocyte category, along with our T cells and our B cells, so that adaptive immune system. So that lymphocyte category is really going to encompass a large part of our immune system. So it's important that we break that down and look at it. And we can actually expand that lymphocyte through a lymphocyte enumeration panel, and we can assess your risk for viruses and cancers before you come in contact with it. So for those of you who are living in fear, not really understanding if you're going to be at risk or susceptible, we can test that and we can see what your risk is going to be before you start to come in contact with things, so you don't have to be afraid of viruses, cancer, things like that in the future. Now, this is going to be an example of a patient whose lymphocytes are decreased. So on this panel, what we can see, granulocytes are high and lymphocytes are low. Now, granulocytes are high because of the decrease in the number of lymphocytes, so it's a percentage. It all has to add up to 100, so if one goes low, the other one has to go higher as a result of that. However, if we look at the actual number of lymphocytes, it says it should be between 1 and 3.6, and this patient's at 1.1. So if we know that the lymphocytes are very important in that adaptive immune response and our innate immune response getting rid of things, we do not want those to be low. And so that's something that we're going to want to work on strengthening for this patient to make sure that they're not going to become susceptible to other things. Now, this particular patient, we also ran, oh, never mind, we've got another lab here. So this is a patient whose entire white blood cell count is low. So their immune system has been responding for so long that now it's completely tanked. So when we look at patients like this, remember we said at the very beginning that the immune system is a bunch of processes and pathways. So we have all these different cells that all have to signal to each other. And that signaling takes nutrients, so things like vitamin C, things like zinc. And every time we utilize a pathway, we start to use up those nutrients. So if we don't ever remove the stress on the immune system, then we're always going to be pushing down the same pathways until we no longer have any nutrients left. Then those pathways are going to become depleted. So in the instance that I use where I fall and I scrape my knee, the virus gets in. If my body's working properly, I'm going to form a scab, my knee's going to heal, and that virus is no longer going to be able to come across. So the immune system spikes up, gets rid of it, the insult to the knee is gone, the viruses go away, and we're back to normal. Now say that the scab on my knee never heals, and I'm constantly just rubbing dirt in it that has that same virus or the same bacteria. Now my body's going to be in that constant immune response, and over time, it's going to cause immune suppression. And that's exactly what's going on with this patient here, where you can see that 2.7 when it should be between 3.9 and 11.4, really between about 5 and 8. So that patient's very immune compromised now. Their lymphocytes are depressed and their granulocytes are depressed. And so in this case, this is a patient who should be afraid of going out, coming in contact with a virus, of developing cancer, something like that, because this patient does not have enough cells to really support and help itself. So this is a patient that we're working on trying to actually restore that. And that's one of the things I'm going to go through with you next week, is looking at some specific labs before and after what caused the immune suppression and what we did to actually restore that so the patient's body can function normally again. Now, moving on to the acquired immune system. So this is where we're going to start to talk about the T cell responses and the B cell responses. Now, the acquired immune system, again, is not present at birth. And that's why we said that the kid's shield is degenerating, because they haven't been in contact with enough things to actually boost that immune system. Now remember, there was a joke that went around at the very beginning of COVID that said the kids who drank out of water, or drank out of the hose spigot, were not going to be susceptible to COVID, right? Because they were running around in the dirt, drinking out of things they shouldn't have been drinking out of, exposing their body to all these pathogens, which actually help to strengthen that immune response. Now, that's not entirely the case, but it's a good joke, and I thought it was funny. So, over time, as we expose ourselves to things, that immune response should strengthen and should grow if we have all the nutrients and things to fill those pathways, and that's going to be a big if. We'll talk about that again next week. So moving on into the third box here. So the third box is, what is our adaptive immune system doing to identify those different pathogens and then start to signal a more specific response. So we didn't talk about this yet. The big thing with the innate immune system is it's non-specific. So natural killer cells go after any virus, any cancer-infected cells. Those macrophages, the dendritic cells, they're going to start to swallow up and eat anything that comes across the border that it's not supposed to. Now, if we have a huge influx of a single virus, if we have a huge influx of a single bacteria, say we get COVID or we get sick or something like that, Now we have a lot of one thing, and we need to call in additional reinforcements and troops to really help respond to that. And that's really where our adaptive immune system starts to come in and play a big role. The first role there is going to be with our CD4 cells, T cells, which are called helper T cells. Then we have B cells, and those go after and neutralize the infected cells. And we'll talk about this a little bit more right now. So if we go back to my analogy of tripping, scraping my knee, or I cut my arm open, right? I've cut the barrier, and now I have an exposed area where the external environment is now exposed to my internal environment. So if we use the example of a bank robber, this is our external environment. In our internal environment, the bank robber should stay on the outside, right? The bank robber should stay on the outside of the bank. Say something happens, the door is unlocked, now the bank robber comes across to the inside of the bank. Our T helper cells, or the first thing that's going to happen is our macrophages and our dendritic cells are going to recognize that there's a problem there. So whether it's the security guard at the front desk, whether it's the teller behind the counter, they're going to recognize that something is inside that's not supposed to be there, and they're going to start to sound the alarm. Now what that alarm looks like is the T helper cells. So say we trigger the silent alarm, now we're reaching out to 911 and the operator. So that's what our T helper cell is really like. They're our 911 operator. They're going to start to actually coordinate the additional responses that we need in order to eradicate the virus, the cancer cells, if we need to eradicate, get the bank robber out of the bank. So from here, the CD4 helper cell is going to do two things. They're going to send signals to our cytotoxic T cells, which are our troops. So these are very specific cells designed to go after one single virus, one single cancer cell, one single bacteria, right? They're going to respond to the scene, and if everything's working properly between the cytotoxic T cells, the CD8 cells, and our natural killer cells, we're going to be able to get this bank robber out of the bank, take him to jail, clear that virus out of the body. Now, at the same time, they're going to start to signal and stimulate B cells, which are our antibodies. That antibody response is the memory response, which is what's going to allow us to make this whole process happen faster if we're exposed to it again. When we talk about things like COVID, we're very focused always on that antibody response, right? Because we want to be able to fight the infection faster the next time we're exposed to it. That's what those antibodies are for, and we're going to talk a lot more about that next week when we dive a little bit deeper into this. So CD4 cells, the CD4 count is like a snapshot of how well your immune system is functioning. CD4 cells are white blood cells that fight infections. The more you have, the better. These cells are the cells that HIV virus kills, right? So the human immunodeficiency virus. We don't have a strong enough immune system when we get HIV, and what happens is you don't actually die from HIV. You die from something else like pneumonia or whatever it is, because your body can't actually fight that infection because the immune system has been suppressed for so long. Now, HIV research is what actually allowed us to identify CD4 and CD8 cells. And if you're familiar with any of that, you'll be familiar with the CD4-CD8 ratio. That's so important when you're watching the progression of HIV. Well, if we understand the immune system properly, then we can use those same sort of tools and the same values to actually look at our immune system's ability to respond to things, right? So if we can look and see that our CD4 cells are suppressed now, then we can take steps to increase that function so we're not going to be susceptible in the future again. CD4 lymphocytes help coordinate the immune response by stimulating other immune cells such as macrophages, B lymphocytes, and CD8 T lymphocytes to fight infection. So again, they're like the 911 operator that's going to start to call in all the other specific troops that we need to fight and coordinate that response. And then we have the last part. So we talked about this already. Macrophages and dendritic cells are going to alert the CD4 cells. That's what bridges the innate immune response with our adaptive immune response. From there, the CD4 cells are going to start to make antibodies, and they're going to start to make CD8 cells. The CD8 cells, again, are specific to a single virus, a single cell type that they're going to really go after and try to attack and get rid of and get out of the body. Now, if everything works the way it's supposed to, again, the stress comes off the body, the virus stops entering the body through the cut heals, the body responds appropriately, takes care of the virus that came across the skin, and everything is happy and dandy, just like it should be. Again, CD8 cells, foot soldiers of the immune system. They're the ones that are going to go in and actually respond and take out those infected cells. CD8 positive T cells are a critical subpopulation of MHC class 1 restricted T cells. That just means they're not going to respond to human tissue. There's a lot of other receptors and things we have on cells, which is what allows the immune system to identify self from bacteria, viruses, cancer cells, things like that. We don't have time to go over. I'm already 15 minutes over what I said I was going to keep you guys till tonight. So we'll skip over that. Just understand that they're a subpopulation of a much larger class, and the immune system is way more complicated than what I'm making it seem like that right now. But with that understanding, being able to test and look at these things is going to be very important if we want to support the immune system. And what that really looks like is this. So this is a lymphocyte enumeration panel. Now, I was trying to find one of these that's normal. However, we typically only run immune panels on people who are coming to have them run because they know something is wrong. Not too many people come into the office and say, I just want to test my immune response and make sure I'm not susceptible. I would love that to be the case, but unfortunately right now it's not. If that is your goal, we can absolutely test your immune response and make sure you're not going to be susceptible. If your immune response comes back and this is what it looks like, this is not going to be a good day. So this is a patient that actually just came in about 2 weeks ago. She got COVID, recovered from COVID, but after COVID she started having heart palpitations, and she started just getting sick all the time, right? And what happened was COVID was a huge stress on her immune system. It used up all those pathways. Her body was able to fight it, but then her body couldn't recover from it. And now other things are going on and taking place that's continuing to keep that immune system suppressed. We're going to go over a lot more labs of this specific patient next week so we can look at what that looks like through the whole body. But understand that right now, CD4 cells are low and natural killer cells are low. So this patient is going to be very susceptible. One, because they can't sound the alarm. And if the natural killer cells are this low, they're not going to be able to get rid of any of those things that are coming into the body. And this is why she keeps getting sick all the time. So we're working on stuff. She started doing a couple things about 2 weeks ago. We are going to retest this, and I expect that these numbers are going to return a lot closer to normal values. So again, thank you guys for sticking with me tonight. This is the first in a series of at least 12 weeks, so I'm going to commit right now to every week for the next 12 weeks going through a specific health talk with you and talking about a specific disease. So if you have questions, things that you're worried about, things that you want to see or learn more about, just drop a line in the comments. I'll put together a talk and we'll talk about that. If you want to get your immune system tested, we can do that. Just give us a call, click the link, get into our Facebook pages or connect with us on our website. We love taking care of people and making sure that we're able to test this type of stuff to see and make sure you're not going to be at risk for things like cancer, viral infections, and stuff like that. So thank you guys for sticking with me tonight. If you found this helpful, please share this, like it, comment below. Our goal is to help as many people as possible. We want to make sure that our community is the healthiest it can be, and it all starts with understanding where you're at right now. So again, if you found this helpful, please like and share. If you're in another state, we can always help you. This is not something that I do specifically. This is all Wellness Way stuff. There's Wellness Way offices across the country, so if you're watching from somewhere else, I'd encourage you to go to www.thewellnessway.com. In the top right-hand corner, you can click up there and find the location close to you. So if this is something that you'd like to do, see if there's a location close to you. If not, we can still work with you, but it's always better if you can go in person and find somebody. And again, we really just want to make sure that everybody's going to be as healthy as possible moving forward, so we're not going to be susceptible to things like viral infections, cancer, some of the leading causes of diseases. So again, thank you guys for hanging out with me tonight, and I'll see you next week, either next Tuesday or next Thursday. And we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about some of those immune responses and what weakens the immune system and how we can actually take steps to fix that. So thank you guys, and we'll see you next week.